All right, so I just finished watching the new Netflix docuseries, Reckoning of Sean Combs, executively produced by 50 Cent. And this is my reaction video to it. If you haven't watched it, get out of here because I am going to spoil a lot of things. So let's get right to it. Off the top of the dome, here I go. To me, this entire four-part docuseries was just one big timeline, one big crescendo that sort of explains how we get to where he currently is. And it starts all the way at his childhood and his upbringing. It touches on a lot of things that were publicly known. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about this docuseries, that I would say probably 90 to 95% of the information presented in the docuseries was already publicly known information. They do introduce some new footage and some new information, but it's basically, the new information is basically used to reinforce this narrative that's being created about Sean Diddy Combs. So let's start from the very beginning. The very beginning, like I said, it basically just focuses on this kind of psychological profile, and it starts with his childhood. They go into his dad's association with gangster culture and how that impacted him. It goes into his mom and being raised by a single mother. For me, some of the shocking things that were brought up in the documentary, there was one point where they sort of alluded that she could have been potentially selling drugs or being involved with pimps and that sort of thing. It's kind of eye-opening, especially the part where they mentioned that she had a stage in her apartment and they would make Diddy and his friends dance at parties, at his mother's parties. So, you know, sort of very interesting, and it could be very tragic depending on how you look at it. Like a child that has to sort of be raised by this single mother who is caught up in the fast life essentially, and yeah, it was very interesting. Also very interesting that they made sure to mention that the money that Diddy's dad made as a gangster, even though he was gone, Diddy and his mother did benefit from some of that dirty money. They allude to him as a child always wearing, you know, the best clothes and all that, and being heavily in the dandyism culture. I think that's what it's called, the Harlem dandyism culture. So that's a very, very strong, right off the bat, kind of like, this is who you're dealing with. This was his upbringing. Moving on, like I said, a lot of the information in here was not new. It's been publicly known, especially if you're from my generation. We lived through a lot of this stuff. I think for the new generation, it was great that they made a point to kind of highlight that Diddy's rise to power started really in the 90s, right when hip hop was sort of making this transition from, or not even making it, it had started to kind of hit mainstream with Run DMC and all that. And Diddy really just kind of came into hip hop at a time when it was clearly, you know, like the beginning of its global dominance. And he really benefited, you know, from sort of being at the start of what hip hop would go on to be. So that, you know, once you understand that he caught hip hop not at the origins of hip hop, but at the beginning of when hip hop became mainstream, it kind of puts a lot of pieces together, how he was able to like scale up and gain so much power and influence so quickly. Not to take away from his talent, which they did talk about his talent, and as a musician, I think I feel obligated to highlight that. At the end of the day, he is like one of the most talented producers in the history of the culture, in the history of hip hop. But they definitely made a point to mention, you know, his relationship with Andre Harrell, his ascension throughout the ranks. And what you see is him slowly gathering power, gathering influence, you know, in the early days, from the very early days when he was still a protege of of when he was still a protege. I forget the guy's name. I just mentioned them. They talk about him doing these parties to make extra money and all that stuff. So he's slowly always kind of gaining power, money, influence. And like I said, a lot of this information is not new. The celebrity basketball game, the tragedy, that's publicly known. The Tupac and Biggie information, a lot of the stuff is publicly known, has been mentioned in multiple documentaries. The situation with Shine and J-Lo, a lot of it is publicly known. And I think that's what makes this docuseries so interesting. It's like is basically putting a mirror to us. And it's like, hey, you've known this. We've known this as a society about this guy. And it's like, when are you finally going to see him for what he really is? And I think that's really the thesis of the docuseries. It's like, hey, you've seen all these things, but now I'm going to present it to you in this really organized timeline, and you're going to see that as a society, you've been letting him get away with all this stuff, and because of this massive public support, he's gotten out of hand. And if you really think about it, the story of Diddy is no different than any other billionaire, right? Except with the exception that he used hip hop was his medium to attain the power. Essentially, Diddy exploited hip hop. He exploited, and they talk about the exploitation through the contracts and stuff like that. He exploited his way to the top. He exploited relationships. And between his business connections and his street connections, he was able to make a lot of things happen very fast. And that's sort of the narrative that this docuseries sort of highlights. It's like, hey, this guy has been doing this, getting along with it, and he's gonna keep doing it if we as a culture, we as a society, don't stop supporting him. And yeah, like I said, is a very, very interesting sort of approach to the documentary. I think when people saw that 50 Cent was going to be the executive producer, they assumed that they would be getting, just bashing of Diddy. But from a journalistic point of view, in my opinion, I feel like it was very smart to just sort of present the facts. I mean, a lot, like I said, and I know I keep repeating this, but most of what they showed in the documentary, these aren't new things that were secret. We've known about these things, and the documentary simply presents it to us and paints this narrative of like, hey, this is not a good person in hip hop, and yeah, like he's gonna continue to do these things unless we as a society like stop supporting him. And one of the reasons why I bring up the point of us as a society and use the analogy of the documentary serving as a mirror to us is because a lot of the people that he worked with that are being interviewed throughout the documentary, they're like, oh, like I really believed in his movement as a leader, as a cultural icon, and we didn't want to ruin that. And I think, especially for younger viewers, that was a really important thing that they highlighted in the documentary. It's like Diddy truly was, coming out of the Black Panther movement, coming out of going into the mid 90s. Diddy sort of represented the American dream for minorities. It was kind of like one of the first characters for millennials, really, that we could view at a minority person, a person of color, and who was able to attain wealth through hard work. And that was sort of his thing, like, hey, I came from the slums, I worked hard and I made it to the top, you can do it too. And a lot of people admired him. That's why, you know, we see like the BET Icon Award and the billboard on that he had in Times Square, because that's really, he was sort of like a superhero for underprivileged, underrepresented community. And you know, I know I supported him as a kid. I mean, he was inspirational, motivational, and a lot of people believed in that movement, so much so, this is how much influence Diddy had. The Rock the Vote campaign, you could make a strong argument that it essentially helped Barack Obama get elected as president. He was a big part in that campaign, and even up to recently, to like 2016, he was getting heavily involved in politics, and I think he had like his own. I don't want to quote anything, but he didn't have his own political party, but he had like his own organization, essentially, that was gonna like put money behind politicians that they supported. So I mean, you know, when you start getting into those political spheres and you got money to like throw at politicians, I mean, that's an example of how much influence, power, and control Diddy had. So overall, I think the documentary was very smart. It didn't present any new information. It just kind of like, this is what you already knew. Here's some new things to kind of reinforce what's been happening. And this guy is not really changing. He's not really going to change. And he's going to, once he comes out, he's more than likely going to continue doing what he does. It was shocking, honestly, to see even up to his last days, he was documenting everything all the way up to when he got locked up. And even when he was locked up and behind bars, it's really interesting how he used internet marketing to be more specific, to push a certain narrative. And it was really interesting to see how the narrative that he was able to push online was able to impact the jury. So I think that's kind of like evidence of like, hey, this guy thinks that he can play games and get away with things. And even during the trial, he was playing these online games and to try and sway the public's perception, but most importantly, sway the jury's perception, because essentially he knew that marketing was his way to, you know, get to the jury without directly talking to them. So very, very interesting documentary. What's gonna happen with Diddy? I mean, if we're going off the narrative of this documentary, is indirectly saying that he's gonna continue doing horrible things because he thinks that he can get away with anything. I don't think this documentary is gonna be the last one. I don't think Diddy's story is done at all. He still has 70 plus pending charges, or pending, not charges, like court hearings, allegations. So it's gonna be interesting. And it was an interesting documentary. It was an interesting documentary. Just like I said, we've known these things for years, and just to see it presented in such a timeline, it's like, ooh, like, yeah, I knew about that, but I still went in and listened to the Dirty Money album, and I still went and listened to the Love album. So yeah, there are some, you know, some heartbreaking moments in there, some sad stories. Some that stand out off the top of my head is like, I forget the guy's name, who basically got extorted into giving up 25% his 25% stock in Bad Boy, and then dude ended up becoming homeless. the one girl from Danity Kane essentially not knowing whether or not she got essayed. Um, yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot, but definitely I would say it was a just presentation of the facts. And yeah, it's just, it's really eye-opening. It's really eye-opening that as a society, we know things, and we keep supporting even though we know things about people. And yeah, I really do believe this documentary served more as a mirror for us as a people. And yeah, check it out and tell me what you all think about it. Cool. Peace out.